Hey guys, it's me from my channel, and today we're going to tell the story of Jurassic Park. Our story begins in 1986 when a man named John Hammond was building an amusement park filled with dinosaurs. Now this might sound impossible because as far as we know, dinosaurs died out around 65 million years ago. But John Hammond didn't care about that kind of thing. He was rich and he wanted to make a theme park full of dinosaurs. So he spent millions of dollars buying up a small island called Isla Nublar and used that money to hire some of the best scientists in the world. His park would use something called genetic engineering to take the DNA of certain species of mosquitoes that had been preserved in amber for millions of years and fill in the gaps with the DNA of frogs so they could be brought back to life. With the help of computers, they would then copy the genetic material to create dinosaurs. Now, this sounds like a great idea for a movie, but in real life, there are quite a few problems with this plan. For starters, we don't have any fully preserved dinosaur DNA. The best we have are just bits and pieces. And even if we could get our hands on all the genetic material needed to create one dinosaur, that wouldn't be enough to bring it back to life. We would need entire herds of dinosaurs just in case something went wrong. But Mr. Hammond wasn't interested in the science behind his new project. He just wanted to make a really cool theme park, so he continued to spend millions of dollars to build Jurassic Park. After 6 years of work, the park was almost finished. It featured many different kinds of dinosaurs, including a brachiosaurus, a triceratops, and a velociraptor. These dinosaurs were kept in separate enclosures, some of which were natural habitats that had been carefully recreated, while others were more simple cages that kept the animals confined to a small space. But even though Jurassic Park was still under construction, John Hammond invited several people to come see it for themselves. They included a paleontologist named Alan Grant, a paleobotanist named Ellie Sattler, a mathematician named Ian Malcolm, and John's lawyer, Donald Gennaro. The four of them arrived at the park by helicopter. As soon as they got off, they met with Mr. Hammond, who gave them a tour of the park. Along the way, they saw all kinds of cool things, like a herd of herbivorous Maiasaura, a giant meat-eating Giganotosaurus, and a pair of mating Brachiosaurus. John Hammond was very proud of his park. He showed the guests every safety feature, like the reinforced fences and backup generators. He also reminded them that the park's computer system had multiple redundancies to prevent any mistakes. In other words, everything was perfectly safe. The next day, the group took a tour of the park in a Jeep. This time, they saw even more dinosaurs, including a pack of terrifying velociraptors. These animals were much smaller than their relatives, the Tyrannosaurus rex, but they were just as dangerous. And even though they were kept in a supposedly inescapable cage, one of them managed to break free. This should have been a disaster, but the people in the Jeep didn't seem to notice. They continued driving until they came across a river that had been dammed up by fallen trees. The car got stuck in the mud and Donald Gennaro got out to try to fix it. Unfortunately, this proved to be a fatal mistake. He had wandered into the enclosure of the Giganotosaurus, which attacked and killed him. The rest of the group tried to drive away, but not before Donald Gennaro was tossed into the air and completely obliterated. At this point, you'd think they'd turn around and go back to the visitor center, but no, so they pressed on. They left the car and started walking through the forest. They had to cross a river to reach the main gates, but unfortunately the bridge had collapsed. So now they had no choice but to walk along the muddy banks until they found a place where they could wade across. As they walked, they saw more dinosaurs, including a wounded triceratops. Alan Grant wanted to help the animal, but Ellie Sattler reminded him that they were in a restricted area and they had to get out. They finally found a place where they could cross the river and made their way to the main gate. But instead of opening it, they accidentally triggered the alarm, which alerted all the park's security systems. Suddenly the gates closed and armed guards started patrolling the fence line. Now, up until this point, the story of Jurassic Park has been pretty similar to the movie, but here's where things start to get weird. In the movie, our heroes are able to hide from the guards and eventually make their way to the beach where they steal a boat and escape the island. But in reality, this wouldn't have worked. For one thing, the guards would have seen right through their camouflage and opened fire. Even if they didn't, the animals in the nearby enclosures would have sensed the danger and started running for the hills. At that point, the heroes would have been stomped to death by stampeding dinosaurs or simply been torn apart by hungry predators. In the end, the only survivors would have been the ones who stayed in the visitor center. So let's just assume that they did that. The four of them locked themselves inside and waited for the chaos outside to die down. They didn't have to wait long because the power went out and they were plunged into total darkness. Now, normally this wouldn't have been a problem. There were backup generators that would kick in within seconds. But in this case, the alarms had been triggered manually by John Hammond himself, who had realized that his park was unsafe and had shut everything down for maintenance. The people in the visitor center quickly realized what had happened. The backup generator was out of fuel, and the storm had knocked down the cell tower, so they couldn't call for help. To make matters worse, the doors were locked to prevent a stampede. At this point, the only hope would have been to find another way out, like through the ventilation shafts. This is exactly what the characters did in the movie, except it probably wouldn't have worked. For one thing, those ventilation shafts weren't designed for human beings to crawl through. Also, the doors on the other side were probably locked from the inside to prevent guests from wandering into restricted areas. And besides, there was no guarantee that the guests would be able to navigate the maze of tunnels without getting lost or sucked into a giant air duct where they'd slowly suffocate to death. The only other option would have been to stay in the visitor center and hope that someone came to rescue them. This probably wouldn't have happened because the park was unstaffed. The employees had either evacuated or been killed by dinosaurs. Even if someone did come to rescue them, the people in the visitor center wouldn't have lasted long enough to find out. Their supplies of food and water were limited, and the odds of surviving more than a few days without either are pretty low. So basically, everyone in the visitor center would have died. Some would have starved to death, while others would have been trampled by panicked herbivores or torn apart by hungry predators. A few might have even survived long enough to be rescued, only to die from injuries sustained during the escape. All in all, the only survivor would have been the guy who stayed behind to fix the car. Of course, he would have been eaten by the Giganotosaurus. And that's the story of Jurassic Park. Do you like stories like this? Let me know in the comments below. And remember to subscribe so you can keep watching.